Our main speaker this week is Jessica Bluemke. Her talk is entitled Taking Up Space. Jessica will discuss her own experiences as an atheist and a woman being told that she is taking up too much space, both literally and metaphorically, and how we as a community can assert our right to space in the public sphere. Let's welcome Jessica.
Hi guys, I'm gonna do some freestyling up here. So as he said, thank you so much for having me. I'm Jessica Bluemke. Jessica Bluemke Grafe is my married name. We're all figuring out what that looks like. So let's just jump right in. So like I said, Jessica Bluemke, I'm from Chicago, live there with my husband, with our dog. I'll show you pictures of the dog if you need it. I studied literature and anthropology at Ball State University. I think there's an alumni in the house, chirp, chirp. Didn't expect to see an Indiana person in Texas, but here we are. So I started writing for the Friendly Atheist blog, which many of you may have heard of, run by Hemant Mehta, in 2012. And then Hemant and I started the Friendly Atheist podcast together in 2015. For a long time, we did mostly interview-based stuff. And then 2016 happened, and we sort of transitioned to a little more of a current events podcast. Not sure if there are any listeners, but it's basically just me and Hemant talking about politics, religion, feminism, LGBT issues, anything that sort of triggers my ire that week. Like most Chicagoans, I dabbled in stand-up comedy, play recreational softball, and 1/3 of my diet is made of pizza and beer. Ask around, it's true. So, hello? Okay. Taking up space. What does that mean? Women are constantly being made aware of the space that we occupy. That means physically, it means emotionally, and professionally. We're going to take a look at these, what they look like in action. We're going to cite studies. We're going to look at anecdotal evidence. And I want to be clear, this presentation isn't to put men on blast. You can go to my Twitter for that. There's plenty of it to be had. We just want to take a second to look at what's expected of women in their personal and professional lives and how opinionated women, maybe who co-host a moderately successful podcast, are affected by that. Also, I did want to give a caveat. I'm not going to discuss race in this particular topic, partially because I think it would be better to bring a person of color in to do that, and also because I have a flight to catch at 7, and we can't be here for all day. So let's jump in. So we're going to start with physically. So, manspreading. Y'all don't have public transportation down here, but as a Chicagoan, I'd like to touch on manspreading a little bit. So when we talk about taking up physical space, it is literally men sitting in a way that takes up more space than they're actually entitled to. According to one study, 1/3 of men are guilty of manspreading on the subway. There have even been campaigns in New York and abroad to combat it, along with things like putting your bag on the seat and other things like that. Now, manslamming is a thing I didn't know there was a word for, but I did know that it was a thing. So about once a year, my mom and I will be walking down the sidewalk. She says, Jessica, I am the only person who ever moves out of anybody's way. She feels like she's like Frogger, kind of juking her way through Chicago. And it turns out that's an actual phenomenon. So there was one woman who, her name was Beth Breslaw, and she spent a couple of months doing what she called walking like a man. In other words, as she was walking down the street, she wasn't moving out of people's way for them. She was just going to keep walking down her path. And therefore, she spent several months of her life being collided with by men. It was a thing she had never noticed, and then all of a sudden, when she just committed herself to not walking into people, just walking in a straight line, trying to get where she's going, men kept crashing into her because they just assumed she would move out of the way for them. She said at one point she was walking from the train to her sister's house. Every single man that walked by her shoulder checked her. Every single one. And it's a little thing, right? It doesn't feel like that big a deal, but when you're spending your entire day sort of like juking back and forth between people, it gets old and it piles on. I also want to talk about weight shortly. When we talk about women taking up space, we always have to talk about weight because women are taught from a very early age, I certainly was, that being small is important. Being skinny is important. Being smaller than your partner is important. You want to be diminutive. For many women, weight is emphasized over health. Doesn't matter if there was one time I had mono and I lost a ton of weight. I was super sick and everybody kept telling me how great I looked. My health wasn't as important as how I looked. Space in films. So according to the Gina Davis Institute in Gender and Media, 2015 male characters had twice as much screen time as female characters, and film with male leads had triple the screen time. Male characters spoke twice as often, and male-led films tripled that. Now remember, in films with female leads, male characters still spoke 50% of the time. And compound that with the fact that fewer than 1 in 5 films in 2015 were female-led, we're hearing female voices less on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to take one specific example of the space that women occupy in particularly beloved films, and what happens when women start to gain even a little bit of their space back. And this is the point in the talk where I regret that I didn't call it Space Wars. It would have been a catchier title, but I committed to it already. So Star Wars has a not strong history with portrayal of women. In fact, New Hope, the first in the Star Wars franchise, Episode 4, don't talk to me about Star Wars, that's all I know. Only 15% of screen time is dedicated to women, which is alarming. The Last Jedi comes in first, 43%, and this is a female-led film. Now, we're still looking at a film where half the population gets less than half of the screen time, and what happened? People were mad. People recut it so that they edited out all of the women. Kelly Marie Tran was driven off Instagram for the gall of being an actress in a movie that people liked. There was this a real Twitter campaign where people wanted to remake The Last Jedi because it was such a travesty because there were so many ladies and one of them had purple hair and they hated it. So, remember, women only took up half the screen time of this movie and people lost their mind. We'll also talk about TV. There's never been a female late-night talk host. MSNBC and Fox News each have 6 female anchors. CNN only has 3. None of them are on prime time. Podcast stats, they're very tricky to get a hold of, as anybody who works in podcasting knows, but about 2/3 of podcasts are hosted by men. We're looking at a male-dominated media space. Emotionally. So women are emotional. I don't know if you've heard this particular rumor. A 2000 Gallup poll found that 90% of respondents think that women are more emotional than men. I'm sure this is something that we've all heard. Polls repeatedly find that the majority of men and 1/3 of American women believe that the primary reason that women occupy a disproportionately smaller space in leadership is because they, in politics, in business, it's because they're too emotional. So people also perceive, and I think this is kind of an interesting point on this, people also perceive that men and women feel the same amount of emotions, right? It's not that women just have more emotions, they express them more. So what is being perceived isn't that women have more emotions than men, it's that women can't control their emotions, and they can't keep those emotions in check. That makes them weak, and it makes them ineffective leaders. It also harkens back to notions that emotions are utterly divorced from logic. Did I move ahead of myself? Nope. Divorced from logic, which it's not supported by most recent research. The belief that emotions detract from reason is unsupported in neuroscience. And in fact, certain emotions actually aid in sound reasoning and effective decision making. So, women aren't more emotional, even though they may express it more, and even if they are, that's okay. But that's what we're dealing with. Next is the kind of emotions. Excuse me. So women are perceived to express all emotions more except for anger and pride. These are traditionally very male emotions. So the cool double standard here is that according to at least one study, female leaders who express anger are perceived as out of control. And men who express anger are seen as in control and forthright. If a man gets mad, the situation caused it. Something made him mad. If a woman gets mad, she's just an angry person. We're talking about internal and external emotions, and generally women kind of fall on the short end there. I mean, it's also a two-sided sword because it's something that often will colloquially refer to as toxic masculinity, and that men are not allowed to express these feminine emotions. Women aren't allowed to express these masculine emotions, and therefore we have a whole population of people who don't get their full range of emotions, and that's, I don't know, maybe why we're all having trouble communicating with each other. You can see Kavanaugh versus Christine Blasey Ford, the recent Serena Williams incident. The way we perceive women's emotions are different. We're comparing how men and women act on such different scales that it's impossible to compare public perceptions. And since men have the template of what a strong leader looks like, women are always going to fall short and be asked to take up less space with their useless lady emotions. Women apologize a lot. I don't know if you're like me. I apologize to inanimate objects at least twice a week. It's a neat habit I have. What I think is interesting is women are perceived as apologizing more. Women actually do apologize more. But women and men apologize if they feel like if they've done something wrong at the same rate. In other words, the reason women apologize more is they perceive that they have done more things wrong. Men simply walk through the world assuming they don't have anything to apologize for, and therefore they don't apologize. It's just one extra drop in the bucket. And it's not just the gripping need that people like me to have everyone like them and approve of them and think they're cool and funny. Women have to be perceived as nice to gain influence at work, in addition to be good or as good as or better than their male counterparts. Men don't have this burden. Self-confidence is great in a man. It is deeply dislikable in a woman. Just something about her, right? Just look into your heart. I think we all have had people in the public that there's just something about her. I feel like there's just something about her does apply to women much more frequently than men. So, moving on to experiences. Women's experiences are frequently ignored, and they don't seem to count. So when a woman gets raped, if she reports it immediately, if she's believed by the police, if they choose to move forward with it, they use a rape kit to theoretically help catch the perpetrator. There's famously hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits just sitting on shelves. We as a society believe in theory that rape is bad, right? We've kind of agreed with that with our laws. But for some reason, the police seem to not care much when it comes to trying to go after these perpetrators. Is it because the existence of drugs or somebody's stolen car are seen at a higher priority than a woman's experience? I'm not sure, but there has to be a reason ingrained in our society that we don't think testing these rape kits is a priority. Doctors take women's pain less seriously. Maternity leave is lower in the US than any other first world nation. The government doesn't seem particularly worried about this right now. Domestic duties, which are often seen as feminine, are minimized and often fall to women. Childcare, cooking, cleaning, tending to sick families. These are all things that need to get done, but they don't count because it's not. Likely because of this, even women who work full-time do 60% more housework than their male counterparts. Even fashion for women is thinner, less practical. I am wearing a pair of pants right now that has no pockets, has some fake ones, don't have any place to put my phone. I hid it in my backpack because I couldn't figure out what to do with it. So if you've ever been on the internet and talking to somebody, there is a tendency, and you may notice this pattern, of men to perceive their experiences as objective, and everyone else is seeing things as subjective. So if you felt somebody did something wrong, but somebody disagrees with you, if you're a man, you feel like you have the objective truth in your pocket, and you saw it for what it is, and you're not tainted by any kind of emotions or anything like that. Anybody else who disagrees with you, they're using their own emotions to blind them to the real truth. It's something we see a lot, and it can make talking to people very frustrating. So professionally, there's mansplaining. We've heard about mansplaining. I don't really want to dig into mansplaining. I'm kind of sick of hearing about it, sick of hearing people do it. Interrupting. Men interrupt women 33% more often than they interrupt women 33% more often than other men, according to one study. And it happens everywhere, and it happens all the way up to the Supreme Court. When Sandra Day O'Connor was the only woman on the bench, 35.7% of the interruptions were directed at her. By the time it got to 3, with Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan, 2/3 of the interruptions are directed at one of them from the men on the Supreme Court. Men speak more in meetings, about 75% of the time, according to one study. And an even more fun standard is that even when women speak less, they're perceived as speaking more. So maybe it feels like I've been up here for 2 hours because I've been talking at you so long. Male execs who talk more than their peers are viewed to be more competent, and female execs are viewed as less competent if they talk more. So, as a co-host of a moderately successful podcast, I experience all of these things on a daily basis because there's many, many platforms that people can reach me and tell me what they think about me and my voice and my laugh and my words. People will, I would say once a week, repeat my own points back to me. They'll listen to my podcast, listen to either what I said or what I implied, and then tweet it to me as if they had just come up with this brilliant idea that I had said while they listened to the podcast. What this does, it seems minor, but it minimizes my impact. It makes me feel like people who are literally listening to my show are not listening to me, and that's sort of a frustrating position to be in. This might be my favorite one. People direct their feedback to my co-host, Hemant. Now, Hemant Mehta, I am the first to say, is more famous than I am. He's got more name recognition, and he's a dude. But the amount of times I have gotten tweets to me or iTunes reviews or comments telling Hemant to keep his co-host in line or ditch the girl, frequent. Very frequent. I'm generally not used by name when people talk about me. They don't find me on Twitter. They tweet at him and tell him to pass a message along to me. They tell him to keep me in line. They tell him to probably go with somebody else. Or they say, my favorite, it used to be better before Jessica got there. Hi, I'm Jessica. I founded the Friendly Atheist podcast. I don't know what reality you were living in that I wasn't a co-host from the jump. My opinions are wrong. Did you know that I'm wrong about liking the new movie Ghostbusters? People tell me that all the time. I literally have been told, you are objectively wrong. That movie is objectively bad. And by the way, it has nothing to do with gender. There's just something about it I don't like. I get that so much, it's kind of wild. I never thought that movie would be like a defining point in my atheism career, but like, here we are. Nagging. This is another really fun one that I deal with a lot. I get a lot of, Jess is annoying at first, but she grows on you, or I actually really like Jess. As if they're so surprised at this prospect that somebody could find me likable, they need to make sure they get why you don't like her. I do, though. And that's aside from the genuinely mean and insulting messages I get. Here we go. Uncontrolled giggling actually hurts my brain. Super annoying. Terrible. I hate white men. Duh. I'm the parody of sorority girl pillow talk. I don't know what that means. That's from when I was interviewing one of my best friends, Anne. She's a professional journalist. Apparently, we talk like sorority girls, which is bad. by the way. Sorority girls are the worst. I grow on you, so maybe by the end you'll like me. I diminish the quality of the podcast. Do I have a laser guy? I don't. What else? I cackle, which is a little bit gendered and loaded. I annoy the crap out of people. I need to be less extra. Again, objectively wrong about Ghostbusters. This comes up once a month. I cannot explain why. Terrible, terrible voice, emotional, uninteresting, off-putting. These are all pull quotes from tweets, from reviews, from emails, from Facebook comments, from blog comments. Again, many mediums for people to tell me in which way they specifically don't like me. So why does it matter? Yeah, women talk less than men. Women occupy fewer spots in leadership than men. Why does it matter? First of all, we need all the good people we can get. Let's not pretend that we're living in a utopian world where we just have so many moral, capable, excellent leaders that we can just separate women right out, because who needs them? We've got plenty of people who know what they're doing. In reality, by raising the barrier of entry to women in public or professional spaces, we're necessarily losing women who aren't willing to deal with the crap that comes with being not just a public figure, but a female one. I'm lucky. I did stand-up for years. I blogged for a long time. I got used to people being very mean to me and calling me dumb. I can now laugh about it. A lot of people can't, and there's no reason this shouldn't have driven me off the internet by now. Diversity makes us stronger. We need diverse voices in the secular world. It makes us stronger, it amplifies our message, and it helps people. I believe that the work that we're doing is good and it's helpful, and I think that many of us agree. So we owe it to the non-white dudes of the world to feel welcome here and welcome in our space. So I think we can agree that being an atheist doesn't necessarily preclude you from having biases, despite the fact that all of us try to be logical and skeptical as often as we can. We like to think we approach the world from a fairly reasonable level. But how women are perceived is all linked back to the patriarchal world that was, if not started by, perpetuated by religion. If we're going to shed anti-science and illogical thought that's left over from religion, the substandard treatment of women must be part of that, or we're only ever going to get halfway there. Because Donald Trump happened. Donald Trump is like all of my previous slides came to life and ran for president. He is what happens when loud, confident men are perceived as leaders and competent women are perceived as unlikable. If you have any doubts in the last 15 minutes, remember that a literal con artist bullshitted his way into the most powerful position in the world by taking advantage of how our society feels about women. And when women try to rise above the station, we have to stop them. So what can men do? Self-awareness is always going to be a key here. I don't know about you, I have a full-time job, I sit through a lot of meetings. We all kind of go through autopilot through most of the day. We're not thinking about the large ramifications of what we say or what we do in that one dumb meeting that you're in. But it's a good time to take stock and observe your own behavior and observe the behavior of the people around you. Listen. It's an extremely important thing we all need to learn how to do. It's okay to shut up sometime. It's great to listen to what people are saying. If you're sitting in a chair right now and you're thinking, yeah, but, or, well, I challenge you to sit with that for a minute, because when the majority of women are kind of singing the same song, you owe it to us to listen. If you feel comfortable, if you feel uncomfortable, if you're not digging what I have to say, ask yourself why before you come up to me afterward and tell me about your one mean boss that you had who really emasculated you. You can leverage your privilege. You can boost marginalized people around you, including, but not limited to, women. If you notice men are interrupting the women around you, do something about it. If you are sitting in a room, maybe in a leadership room, maybe in a leadership of a secular movement, and you're seeing mostly dudes, point it out, do something about it, encourage women to get involved. Take a step back and realize life isn't a zero-sum game. If a woman is succeeding, she's not doing that, A, to spite you, she's not doing that in spite of you, and she's not taking your spot. It's not a zero-sum game. If a woman wins, men don't lose. That's just not how the world works. You need to carry some of the weight. It's not your girlfriend or your wife or your female friend or your mom's job to teach you about the challenges that women face in the world. Those resources are out there. I know, I've written about 1 million words on it. You can find it. Yes, have a conversation if you're engaged. Don't expect women to do your homework for you. I don't have time to explain why hysterical is a loaded descriptor of women to Tucker Carlson. It's not my responsibility. He needs to, use the Google once in a while. And finally, believe women. We've been rallying with this for quite a while now, but please believe us when we tell you we feel unsafe, that we feel marginalized, that we feel threatened or overlooked or abused. Believe us, please. We're not lying. We have nothing to gain. What can women do? So pay attention. Again, try to become a little more self-aware about who dominates conversations, who interrupts whom, what stories we're asked to care about in fiction, and in news media, be aware of coded language that's being used. Hysterical, shrill, emotional. These are gendered words that we use to diminish women all the time. Amplify. So I am not asking every woman to stand up and reclaim their time like Maxine Warner, or if that's not your jam, if you're not comfortable doing that. But help your fellow women speak up. In the Obama White House, they actually, the word amplify comes from a technique they used in the Obama White House when they were sitting around a table, and if a woman said something and wasn't wasn't acknowledged, somebody else tried to take credit for it, another woman would say, hey, Mary had a really good idea, how about this? And say the other person's name, make sure their name was heard, make sure their idea was heard and credited to them properly. If a woman had a good point, oh, I just said that, cool. And then shine theory. Shine is one of my favorite things. Shine theory basically says that even though women are sort of bred to be competitive with one another in the workplace, a lot of times you see that one other woman as your rival. If she doesn't shine, you don't shine. You're here to boost each other up, not tear each other down. And that's the end of my talk.
We'll take some questions for Jessica now. Please remember they need to be questions and not comments so that more people can ask questions.
Okay.
I'm not calling.
Good morning. How you doing?
Hi.
I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I do want to bring up the 2016 Democratic primary because I do have a question to kind of how do we help navigate this. During the 2016 primary, many people who supported Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders accused Bernie Sanders and his supporters of just, being in the race because of sexism, despite the fact that he himself was pro-choice on reproductive issues, despite the fact that Bernie Sanders had the support of many millennial women, despite the fact that many supporters in 2018 Democratic primaries for Congress have supported progressive female challengers over more conservative males. For example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez over Joe Crowley. My question to you is, if there's like a political race and a primary or a general election, and the female candidate just flat out does not share my values, for example, like Medicare for all or when we go to war, and a male candidate, her male opponent, happens to support my values, how do we offer that critique without coming across as sexist? Because I could see how that can come across as sexist, but at the same time, there's legitimate policy differences. How do we, navigate that balance?
So I think somebody's policy is certainly more important than their gender. My experience as a woman who supported Hillary in the 2016 primary was not just let's have an interesting discussion about where we stand and where we are. It was piling on. It was, if you're supporting Hillary, you're wrong and you're in the pocket of big pharma or whatever. I think if we're willing to have an interesting and honest discussion about the merits of candidates, we can. I think the thing that happened in the Democratic primaries spun out of control in a very real way. Supporting Bernie Sanders over Hillary wasn't and isn't inherently sexist. I don't believe that, and I don't think any person who's being intellectually honest with themselves is. I do think that it's important to remember, and this is just speaking from my experience talking to men on the internet and in real life, me saying I support Hillary for these 5 reasons and you saying no isn't sparking intellectual discussion. It's piling on and it's not helpful and it's not how we're going to get better candidates.
Question over here.
Thanks for the talk. I listen to a few true crime podcasts, and I've noticed that women really outnumber men as listeners. I'm not sure about hosts, but most of the shows I listen to are mostly women. And do you have any idea why that would be?
I have so many theories about this because My Favorite Murder is one of my favorite podcasts. I'm a true blue murderer now. My theory, and this is something that is based on nothing but my own mind, is that as women, when we kind of move throughout the world, we're sort of always a little on edge. When I was 15, my best friend taught me how to do the thing where you put your keys in your fist. Did anybody else have a friend that taught it? Yeah, she knows. So there's an element of you're walking down the street and a guy's walking in front of you or behind you or toward you, and you're just a little on edge. Who knows who that guy is? You're aware. My theory is that true crime is like almost the reality, the worst case scenario of what you're always afraid of. It's almost like urban legends of this is the worst possible case scenario. And this also proves all of my weird paranoia about that car that I think drove by me twice. It kind of gives that leverage, and it makes me feel like I'm not this sort of paranoid person because there is real danger in the world. That's just based on me and my friends talking. It's not based on anything scientific, but that's my opinion.
Hey, so thank you for that talk. That was great.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you a question. So a lot of what you were saying in the beginning was like man spreading and man slamming. Mm-hmm. Those are, I would think, stretches to being a lack of conscientiousness, right? And so I think I feel there's my question for you is like, is it fair to just say men are like this, women are like this, when there's a spectrum for everybody? And I mean, some people are more conscientious, some people are less conscientious. I've definitely been checked by women on the sidewalk. I think if you counted it up, I've probably been checked by a lot more men. But is it fair to just say men are like this, women are like this?
Yes and no. I see what you mean. We're treading into not all men territory here, which I would always caution us against. But I think when we're having large scope conversations with this, I'm not talking about you personally. Do you personally manspread and how can I stop it? No offense, you seem very nice. I don't care about you personally. I care about the pattern that we're seeing throughout society. And societally speaking, we see men exhibit these behaviors more. Does that mean men are the only ones who do it? Absolutely not. But it's a helpful rhetorical device when we're trying to solve a large problem. So you can say it for anything. Are all Christian people homophobes? No. Do we see a pattern of homophobia coming out of a Christian church? Kind of. I think it's all the same thing. It's not about individuals. It's more about patterns of behavior that we see.
All right, we have time for one more question, but I think we've started a very good dialogue. Would you be able to join us for lunch afterward to continue the conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so here's our last question.
I was just curious about the diversity of the vitriolic experiences of stuff from your comedic side when you did stand-up comedy versus the internet where they don't have to see you face to face and can say whatever they want unfiltered. So I just wanted a little bit of your insight between the two, like kind of baby steps into the world of the internet's comments.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question, and I don't prefer to be any kind of professional stand-up. I dabbled in it. It was a hobby. I had a few gigs. Essentially, what that came down to is I was almost always the only woman in the room. And so it was less about people being aggressive at me and more me being excluded because I didn't have 15 jokes about Tinder and jerking it. Like, that wasn't part of my repertoire, and everybody else it was just a boys club feeling. And if you've ever felt like the only person in a room who doesn't get the joke, nor is the intended audience for the joke, that was sort of what it felt like. The only reason I had a community is because I took a female stand-up comedy class, and my friends and my group and I would go to open mics together and do shows together, and almost always we were the only women in the room. I think that's it. Are we done? Okay, thanks, guys.